All right, I think we'll get started. So thank you to everyone who has joined for this webinar. My name is Jason Brown. I lead the financial services practice here at ZS. And we're here today to talk about one of our favorite topics, which is distribution, and specifically how artificial intelligence can be used to augment and improve the way we distribute and work with our customers. But as the title suggests, we're not just going to talk about the technical side of distribution. We really want to explore a little bit of the human aspects, the organizational implications, the implications for the actual participants in the distribution process. And so a lot of the discussion that we'll have today will aim to touch on that topic, as well as the artificial intelligence side of the equation. Joining me today are three panelists who will present unique perspectives on this topic. Before I get to the panelists, though, I want to take a little bit of time to walk through just a little bit of perspective on the industry. And I should also say, we want to hear not just from our panelists, but also from those of you who have joined on the webinar. So if you're getting yourselves oriented to the screen here, there should be a little Q&A button at the bottom of your pages. If you have questions as we go through the presentation, please just type them into that Q&A box. And I'll do my best to kind of raise those questions during the course of the discussion. If we don't get to them during the discussion, we'll try to save some time at the end to raise questions from the group. So please feel free to go ahead and fire off questions as we roll through this. So as I said, though, before I turn it over to our panelists, maybe I'll take 5 minutes and just kind of set the stage for this discussion. So when we think about the trends that we're seeing in insurance and asset management, a couple things come to mind. First, as everyone will recognize, there's continuing pressure on fees, which of course are taking revenue out of the equation. We have to work a little bit harder, sell a little bit more to get each dollar of revenue. Coupled with that, what we're seeing is that there's less and less access to our customers. And when I'm thinking of it from a distribution standpoint, to me that means the financial advisors, where we see we're having increasing challenges just getting in front of them, taking a meeting, taking a phone call. That can also mean home office customers who are playing an ever-increasing important role in defining distribution. That's a tough group to access to begin with, and I think as more and more firms run at those home office decision makers, we're seeing less and less willingness to engage. Added to that is the fact that although there have been changes to the distribution landscape in recent years, people have been doing some experimentation, playing with new ideas. By and large, we're distributing products the way we did 10 and 15 years ago. It's predominantly a field wholesaling-based method of distribution, kind of paired with an internal. And in many respects, that distribution model is more costly today than it was, 10 years ago. So if that's kind of the background, the question is, well, what is this leading to? And we're hearing two different things. So when we work with insurers and asset managers, what a lot of them tell us is that distribution today is inefficient. We see gaps in who we're targeting and who we're covering, a lot of time being taken up by non-selling activities, and really the net of it all is that the cost of distribution is rising, that literally the per meeting cost has been going up over the last several years. If you add to that, what we see is that when we talk to advisors or we talk to folks on that side of the house, we hear that distribution is a bit ineffective. So ZS conducted a research study with advisors a couple of years ago, and one of the biggest pieces of feedback we heard was that the asset managers and insurers just aren't really working with them, talking to them in a way that matches their preferences. The interactions are kind of more directed from the firms rather than being kind of pulled by the advisors when they most need them. So you sum these pieces together, and the net of it all is that there's a decrease in productivity across the distribution system. Literally, we're spending more dollars today to get less dollars out of the back end. And that's not really a good equation for anyone who plays a role on the distribution side of the house. So you might ask, what are companies doing in the face of some of these pressures? If productivity is going down, what's happening? Well, before I get to the page, one thing that's happening is that companies are consolidating. So we see M&A activity. Invesco Oppenheimer is a recent example of that. I think there's more in the works. We see similar M&A activity on the retirement side as companies are trying to get scale and kind of overcome some of these pressures. For sure, that's happening. You're also seeing a lot of cost cutting. I mean, you only have to read the last week's Ignites to see several examples of firms trying to take costs out of the equation. The other thing we're seeing a lot of, though, is people trying to tackle the distribution system itself and trying to increase productivity there. And when they're doing that, more often than not, they're turning to data, to analytics and technology to try to bring some new perspective and new intelligence to distribution in an attempt to increase productivity, either better engage with customers and or create lower cost ways of doing so. A lot of you on the phone probably have programs today where you're trying to come up with next best actions for the field to take. Maybe you've hired data scientists to tackle some of these tough questions. So we see a lot of activity here. Unfortunately, the bad news is that although there's been some effort, at least as of yet, we haven't seen any actual productivity increases from the distribution system. And today, those declines in productivity continue in spite of these efforts. So with that stage set, I have to say this is probably too hard of a problem for me to answer. So instead of me doing that, I'm going to put the hard work and the labor on our panelists here, who I think can bring a unique and valuable perspective to this conversation. So specifically, joining me today, I have Pete Mayer, who leads our customer-centric marketing practice at ZS. He works on these distribution-related issues across financial services and a variety of other firms. I've got Aaron Lyman bringing a different perspective. Aaron is a lead in our experience design practice, so thinking about it from a customer and a salesperson experiential perspective. And then Arun Shastri, who heads our analytics practice here at ZS, does tons of work in artificial intelligence and other analytic applications, really across a wide variety of industries. And so our thinking is that while maybe I can't directly answer these questions, across the three of these folks, we can kind of bring a new and fresh perspective to this distribution challenge. Okay, so with that said, maybe I'll kind of kick things off. I presented sort of a pretty complicated and maybe somewhat bleak picture of distribution. I'm curious, Pete, maybe I'll start with you. So what are your reactions? Is this a familiar story?
Hi, Jason. Yeah, thanks for that. Yeah, actually, what you've laid out is a familiar story across industries. What is common across industries is that companies are really striving to use digital and all things digital to get closer to their customers. In other words, through digital interactions, we can learn more about our customers in terms of content preferences, channel preferences, cadence preferences. We can automate things, automate channels, and we can really start to engage customers in a more one-on-one situation. The challenge is that while those technologies exist and maybe some content exists, the challenge is, are companies really able to shift the operating model to fully leverage the capabilities that these digital capabilities enable? And that's where we start to see a lot of interesting dialogue across several industries.
So you talk about the challenge being shifting the operating model. We'll come back to that, Pete, because I think that'll be a fun topic for us to dig into a bit. Arun, I'm kind of curious from your perspective. You know, I mentioned that a lot of folks have been, hiring up teams, trying to solve this problem internally. I guess what sort of pitfalls do you see, or what challenges do you see in doing that?
Yeah, thanks, Jason. I think a common pitfall is when you throw technology, tools, and a few data scientists at the problem. That doesn't work, because what happens is that solutions that are created in an ivory tower don't normally get implemented. And worse, if they are implemented and they are ineffective, that just creates a legacy of something not working. And so newer initiatives, there is a less of an acceptance for newer initiatives. In our experience, I think what we feel really works is that in these sort of new working models, which need to leverage across multiple business units, there are some critical elements that we think are required. One is that we have to find better ways to get cross-functional teams working together. In just what you articulated in your opening, sales has to come together with marketing, has to come together with product, has to come together with business technology. So we have to get better at making cross-functional teams work together. number one. Number two, I think data. We have to get cleverer about and more aggressive about a data strategy that works for us as a whole, because good artificial intelligence systems require a lot of data to be fed into them in order for it to be effective, and data has to come from multiple sources. Third, in terms of implementation, it will be good if you find ways to realize value quickly. So smaller chunks, prove the value, build on that. I think that's an absolutely critical aspect of it. And then last but not least, I think none of these things work unless the sales organization, the distribution organization adopts this. And so some level of attention, energy towards early user experience and adoption and enablement in general, I think are critical aspects of success.
Yeah, so Arun, you talked about the kind of user experience for sales and also the need for cross-functional teams to come together. I'm curious, Aaron, what have you seen on those sorts of topics?
Yeah, that really resonates for me as well. I think the biggest barrier or opportunity is the culture of the organization. And so where people either embrace or resist this depends on how well it's orchestrated across how much involvement the cross-functional teams have in this. In order to really make it work, everyone needs to have their sights on that common vision. So what are we trying to deliver in terms of customer experience? And that intention needs to lie above all the different silos. There needs to be the kind of culture that people can bring forth challenges. What I've seen in a lot of, it's not just in the financial services industry, I think it's how we approach business normally is we're all reluctant to bring a problem forward because we all think that we should be able to handle it. And the challenge is in these complex environments, no one person can handle all of this. It's a cross-disciplinary challenge. I think another issue is trust. And so trusting colleagues, but also trusting the information coming. And I think that's a gradual process as you start to see things, suggestion engines and things. What is that suggestion? What's my personal experience when I try it out? What's that feedback loop? And then that ability to find the right problems and solve them together. So how those teams work together. We're seeing more with, agile groups and squads and working together differently across the organization.
Okay, so that's a kind of you guys have given me a long list of challenges, I guess, right? Failing to invest in data, not having the trust in the system or in each other from a collaboration standpoint. Pete, as you said, kind of maybe plowing forward with not thinking about the operating model and how it would actually work. I guess if that's the list of kind of what not to do, then what is the right approach? Maybe Pete, I'll turn it to you to kind of tell us how you would like to, how we should be thinking about this.
Yeah, and Arun and Aaron basically pointed out some great concepts of where the pitfalls are. But as you can see on the next slide, the way to approach this is by having multiple capabilities integrated and automated together. So we've identified 6 capabilities which are critical to getting this type of functionality up, running, and getting value out of it. It starts with number 1 on data management. And simply put, that's let's collect everything we know about this customer across all of our interactions and put it into a single place. And let's make sure that that is updated frequently and that we can take action on it. Then going to box 2, it's promotional analytics. What we're really focusing here on is what's the customer doing? What's the customer analytics? So a lot of organizations are very used to measuring email open rates, time on website, those kinds of metrics. But what we really want to understand is what about the customer and how should we promote and engage that customer? The third capability is really around strategy. If I have a good foundation and understanding of the analytics and what customers are doing, then what's the right strategy I want to use going forward? The fourth capability is a next best action orchestration capability. How do I automate the engagements with customers? And then, of course, number 5 is the centralized sales and marketing operations. In essence, when I decide the action to take, I want to be able to automate that through and out to the marketplace in a very efficient way. This is all wrapped around number 6, which is basically organization change management. And it's probably the hardest one of the 6. In other words, it's relatively straightforward to buy and stand up different technology capabilities or hire data scientists and whatnot. But to get the organization to leverage these capabilities and use them to their full potential, to change the way they work from maybe the last 20 years to now start to shift it pretty significantly to leverage this, that's a big lift. So the way to approach that is through that 6th capability to make sure that at each step, we're shifting the organization accordingly.
And Pete, your arrows seem to imply that these things are connected in some way, that these aren't just standalone capabilities.
Oh, that's right. So the arrows, the idea is that we talk about the 6 capabilities, and then the arrows are almost as important as each of the individual capabilities. In other words, a lot of the technologies, data, tools, things like that that we're talking about here are cloud-based and can be linked and automated. So the arrows that we have on this slide represent the ability to integrate and automate the entire function. So as you think about the flow of this diagram, you start saying, I need each of these capabilities, not just in silos, but I need them connected, and I need the connection to be in an automated fashion to really take advantage and really kind of operate at the speed of digital, if you will. It enables me to get to customers on a more customized individual basis. Got it.
So if I put my hat on for like the companies that I know, the asset managers, insurance companies, kind of wealth management companies, a lot of them, this kind of implies a level of collaboration between marketing and sales, for example, that I don't know that I've really seen before. I'm just kind of curious, you know, what if you're one of those firms that where you just haven't collaborated in this sort of a way? Maybe Aaron, maybe I'll throw that one your way first.
Yeah, I think there's a big part of this while we're talking about the capability flows, the human side of it and the organizational side of it is a different complementary lens to this. We might want to switch to, there's a stack diagram. Yeah, so there are a couple of lenses on this challenge. One is from the outside in, what is the experience we're trying to deliver for the end customer? One theme that we're seeing across industries and in financial services, of course, in particular, is really that customer centricity. How do we deliver the right product or the right information to the person in the right time? How do we communicate across the organization, as Pete was saying? A lot of that is from the outside in service of what we want to deliver. And then there's the whole back office key activities that happen from the inside out. And what it really requires, what's really different now, is the system view, because everything is interdependent now. As knowledge starts to flow, if we really want to take advantage and act on it, all of these parts need to be connected. So for sales and marketing, one way around some of the challenges you pointed out, Jason, are bringing them together. So in the experience design part, before these systems become orchestrated, one approach we're taking is to put them in the same room and talk about what customers want to see. What does that mean for sales? What does that mean for marketing? What messaging resonates, and start to leverage bright spots as we start to tune the technical engines for this work.
And Aaron, you kind of alluded to like putting people in the room and mapping out the journey. It sounds like a more, almost like a prescriptive journey, if you will, like of where we want to take the customer. Am I reading that right?
Yeah, and actually, it's a good question. And a lot of this, because a lot of it's traveling into new territory, often will start to go into theatrical or improv sorts of skits to really understand how it plays out, what the impact is on the target audience. And of course, there might be cultural differences too, as different financial services companies are looking at different global markets. And so it's a playful approach to really spark the creativity of the team in solving problems together.
That's great. So Pete, Aaron kind of described that, kind of bringing the teams together. I guess anything to add on the way the marketing and sales would collaborate here?
Yeah, I think the key thing to get the collaboration going is to focus on the reason for it and the reason for it outside the company. In other words, if you look at customers, right? Customers are going across what we consider marketing and sales channels pretty ubiquitously. And for us to then recognize that and to say, if we really want to optimize that customer or connect with that customer, we need to do the same thing. And so adjusting the internal process to better fit what the customer expectations are is really the key. And that's a primary motivation to do a lot of the things that Aaron was talking about.
Got it. Okay, so I think I can kind of see the right-hand side of this framework coming into shape a little bit. Focus, I think your advice is focus on the customer, bring the cross-functional teams together and actually plan out what that promotional strategy or that journey might look like. But then there's this whole left side, which is about data and analytics, and I'm trying to kind of understand, where does AI come into all this? So maybe Arun, I'll throw that one your way to get us started. I'm kind of interested in kind of hearing about that side of the equation.
Okay, great. So first, I think it might be helpful. AI means different things to different people. So it might be helpful for us to understand, so that we have the same language. If you think of AI as the ability for machines to act seemingly like humans might, well, humans perceive, we think, and we act. And so AI has those components as well too. From a perception perspective, it's about computers being able to look and be able to recognize objects, such as the autonomous cars, to be able to read and from that extract information for themselves, and to be able to listen as Alexa might and then take command. So that's a perception component. Cognition is typically where you see a lot of the action, machine learning, both supervised and unsupervised learning, things along those lines. And then from an action perspective, many of you probably have deployed bots, intelligent assistants, and the like. So when we think AI and the uses of AI, we have to think of that as a capability, and you have to ask yourself, what is the business problem where this capability is best suited to be deployed? And in some cases, it may be about cognition. In yet others, it may be about perception, and so on. A simple sort of 2x2 framework that we try to leverage to think about where AI might play is one that looks something like this. We have two axes here. The x-axis are you asking and answering existing questions, or are you asking new questions? And is the data that you're leveraging existing data or new data? And what is the role of AI? The role of AI, if it is about existing data and existing questions, the role of AI is simply to automate. These are probably questions that you've asked and answered with the current data to some degree of efficiency for long periods of time. If you're adding new data, such as social listening, then the AI is really augmenting and playing a role of augmentation. If it is about new questions, so what Pete and Aaron were talking to are new questions. It's not just about a single channel anymore. It's about bringing together multiple channels to work together. It's about bringing new departments to think about a problem in a new way. But it might still be all with the same existing data. That's much more about disruption. And this, by the way, this box tends to be the most difficult. And that's why we are talking about the human aspect of AI-enabled distribution. And then last but not least is, you have new data and you're asking brand new questions. How can I leverage blockchain technology? And there, the role of AI is really inventing something that's different. So this might be a helpful way. And why we struggle with some of the questions that we've raised so far is because I think some of the answers that your approaches that you're listening to, and you probably are facing in your organization, are squarely in this disrupt bucket, and that tends to be difficult because you got to get different departments to work together.
Yeah, I think I can see that, Arun. If you're trying to figure out the next best action for a financial to take with an advisor, for example, that would seem to be a new kind of question and potentially very disruptive. I guess, is that the only box in play for some of this, AI-driven distribution, or would some of these others be relevant as well?
I think the augment box is also very relevant in AI distinct distribution. And I think all of these boxes are. I mean, I think, if you think there are examples that we can think of on each one of these boxes, I think the next best action is squarely in the disrupt. Augment, if you're now getting newer data, such as, let's say, social media, and you're still the same questions about promotion allocation, that might also be coming into play. And so I would say probably the augment, automate, and disrupt are the three most relevant buckets.
That's great. Yeah, and I know, Pete, although maybe it may not technically qualify as AI, I know you've told me before about kind of automation being one of the keys to really getting this engine to keep running, I guess. I don't know if you have anything else to add there.
Yeah, actually, the one point I'd make off this slide is this. When we talk to many people across the industries around AI, right, one of the questions they ask is, well, is AI a revenue generator or is it a cost cutter? Right? And I think when you look at Arun's slide here, you can see that it's a little bit of both. Right? So in other words, if we take AI and first put it in the automate box, I'm not saying you have to start there, but let's say we start there. Then what ends up happening is I've taken a process, I've changed the process, I've automated it. Right? And now what I've done is I've sped it up. And by using AI, I can then also start to do some more customization. And so as I start to get new data, or I start to learn new things, or I start to have different business challenges, I start moving into the other three boxes. So then you start to see what AI does is, given the automation capabilities and the ability to disrupt and invent and augment, I can really use this capability for cost efficiency, but also revenue generation.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's helpful. I think I've gotten the same question, Pete, so it's helpful to hear that it's not an either or kind of thing. So I guess if I come back to that framework you shared, Pete, I can I'm starting to see it kind of come together. So one, I think the point that you guys have made is that there is an integrated process. It's not these standalone capabilities. We need these connections. As we talked about on the right-hand side, we've got to have teams working together in ways that are probably going to be pretty new and different from how we've worked in the past. And on the left-hand side, we need to make kind of the smart, right investments in our underlying data, and then the analytics we apply to that data in order to create value. From the look of you guys, it seems like I've roughly got that right. So I think conceptually that makes sense to me, at least, I guess. But I'm just wondering, like, what does this look like in practice? Maybe Arun, maybe I'll throw that one your way first.
Yeah, I think I'd love to talk about it. And one of my clients is a Fortune 5 high-tech client, and they have an inside sales team. And this inside sales team is faced with the following challenge. They have 120 customers on average. These are small, medium corporates. These 120 customers have lots of different buyers within. They buy a broad range of products, everything from cloud services to productivity to databases and the like. And so you need some internal experts. You need to work well with partners and other channels in helping you complete the delivery of the solution to the customer. Seems like a really right situation to enable that selling organization with AI, because AI can help you coordinate across these multiple resources, better understand the various buyers within the organization, and be able to tell you, whom to go with what next, and how to best enable your chances for success with whatever product that you're going to represent in any given day. And what makes this actually work is a lot of what Pete has been talking about on the previous slide. There is a core team that's interested in ensuring that there is adoption of the recommendations that the AI system is generating. The core team ensures that these AI-driven recommendations are naturally occurring to the salesperson. So it's not that it feels like extra work to go out and get it. It's in the natural flow of how they engage with their customers, how they execute on any given day. The recommendations themselves are transparent. It's very clear to the salesperson why a certain recommendation is being made. So it's natural for them to act on it, as opposed to leaving them scratching their head as to, you want me to do what with that customer? And then ultimately, we hold both the salesperson and the AI accountable. Are you delivering good results, good recommendations, and as an AI system? And as a salesperson, are you following through on these recommendations? If not, why? And if you are, is it translating into results? So the recommendations are prioritized, they're relevant, they're simple, and they're delivered in a way that it occurs in the natural flow of how this company executes its selling process. And that's what drives it. And last but not least, I'd like to say, I think this didn't all magically happen overnight. I think the executive leadership team of this organization was committed to seeing success all the way through. They invested in it. People were patient, and then they built on it piece by piece until, and they continued to build on it until they got it right and it became implementable.
Well, that's great. And you know, we actually have a question. I'm going to jump around a little bit here, but we have a question about what the salesperson does in all this. So Arun, you kind of hit on that a little bit already. You talked about it being in the natural flow, but I guess I can imagine where the question's coming from. You know, the salesperson is probably a pretty big participant in or user of this AI. And I'm just curious maybe if Aaron or Arun, I'll put it to both of you, but if you could comment about what it feels like for the salesperson to live in this sort of a world. Yeah,
I can tell you from what we've learned from the advisor perspective, you know, they need to be an expert on a whole bunch of different products. There are big frustrations that we've heard, you know, the day-to-day administrivia of when you think about application forms and things, that can tie up a lot of time trying to chase down answers that or forms that have been rejected. Those are things that are, in my view, really, you know, great candidates to be offloaded to, you know, chatbots and automation, so that the salesperson can actually focus most on what humans do best, which is creating those relationships with their customers, understanding what their customers want. And as they start to try on these suggestions, it's really important is the feedback loop there is from that prediction, we think that this customer, you know, is a good fit for something. Did the salesperson perform that action? And when they did, what happened? And so the metrics and the closed loops are really important here, but it's really about making the salesperson or the advisor into the hero, right? How do we help them be a hero to the people that they're serving? And that's where technology really needs to be wrapped around the person. It's not technology for technology's sake.
I like that idea of making them the hero. That sounds great. Yeah, I'm wondering, Arun, like even in your example, what if the salesperson doesn't use the suggestions, or what? You know, how does that work?
So you know, if to get the feedback from the salesperson, I think you have to give them, as Erin said, a feedback loop. Is the recommendation a good recommendation? Did it result in something in a sale? If it's not a good recommendation, is it because they already worked on it? Is it because the customer is in a different zone at this moment? Is it because the algorithm was just plain wrong? After all, this feedback loop goes back and makes the AI even better. These learning algorithms have to get better over time. And in order for you, that feedback loop is absolutely critical. And if I think the role of the first line manager and sales leadership is absolutely critical. The expectation should be that if I make it easy for you and for you, this is going to enable you to do a better job, then why wouldn't you, right? And the notion is, it's about AI making my interactions as a salesperson even more human. It's got the perception is it's enhancing my performance. It's not replacing me. It gives me a better understanding of the customer. It gives me a more timely interaction. It gives me a more pertinent interaction. And I think that increasingly in business-to-business environments where people say 70 to 75% of a purchasing decision has already been completed before someone even talks to a sales rep, this is a good way for me to ensure that at the right time, I'm talking to the right people within my client organization and delivering the right message and the right products. And so it's about making me more human, making me better. And I think once they understand that, I think the adoption tends to follow.
Jason, I'd love to add something to that too.
Please.
Really being able to have that visibility across. So to gain the trust of the more skeptical, you know, salespeople that are wondering whether they should actually adopt these new behaviors, it's really important to make that success or that learning visible so that they can see, you know, are people who adopt these new behaviors, are they gaining success in the long term? So I think that transparency is really important to get people to try on new behaviors.
Right, so success builds success. That makes sense. So, but as you guys are describing this, I'm imagining this could be very powerful, and then something that, you know, dozens of people are going to want to have their hands on to kind of shape those suggestions. And so I'm wondering, Pete, how does this work from the home office perspective? Do I have 65 people calling plays, or what does this look like?
No. So actually, the topic of getting the sales folks leveraging the engine and the engine results is a key behavioral change that needs to occur. And actually, even driving the totality of the 6 capabilities, it requires changes to structures even in the home office area. And in fact, if you think about what's happening is each of those 6 capabilities we mentioned before is integrated, automated approach using technology. In order to do that and not have individual silos, you need something like you're seeing on the screen right now, which is you need a cross-functional team that's connected and committed to delivering not just the capability and not just the connectivity between capabilities, so the technology is working from the engine off to the field, et cetera, but the behavioral change that Arun and Aaron were talking about. So the team stands up the capabilities and focuses on adoption of these capabilities. How do you use it? And the key thing there is what's the pace with which that adoption can be leveraged across the industry or across that particular company. And gauging the pace of change that an organization can absorb is a critical factor to success. But a first step is knocking down some of those institutional silos that may be around for a long time and really starting to drive a much more cross-functional organization structure, much like you're seeing here.
One other point, if I may, I think sometimes it's okay to sacrifice accuracy of some of these AI models to ensure interpretability is clear. Because, when you're making a recommendation to a salesperson, go and do this, you can give a slightly less accurate solution if you can give them a reason as to why you're asking them to take a particular action. So that's one point I wanted to make. I think the interpretability, explainability is a very important part of this ecosystem. The second is that in all of this, I think where we started, we cannot forget, is that we always begin with the customer, and then you work backwards from there. The customer is at the heart of this. It's not necessarily the distribution organization. It's not marketing. It's not product. It's not any of these other things. It's not the tool. It's the customer. So we start with the customer, work backwards, and then figure out how the rest of these jigsaw puzzles fits in it.
Well, that's helpful. So as you guys are all describing it, it certainly seems like a bigger problem than just, hire 3 data scientists and you're done, or buy a piece of software and you're good to go. It sounds like a pretty heavy lift. I guess I'm wondering, what's the payoff? What's the impact that we've seen when companies have gone down this path? Maybe Pete, I'll throw it to you.
Yeah, so what we've done is we've quantified sales gain. We've quantified a couple of metrics. One is sales gain. And we start to see when companies take the first steps, right? We typically see, and you can see it on the slide, about a 2.5% to 5% increase in top line sales from doing so. And even that's a gain from taking the first couple of steps, not reaching the nirvana stage. So we start to see what that looks like. And the reason you get that, because we've broken down that number, and you can see it on the left-hand side of the slide, the reason you get that is because we're better able to match, right, the content, the cadence, the channels to what the customer's preference is, what they're looking for, when they're looking for it. That ability to use that data and insight and be able to operationalize that insight is really what drives the value here.
So I know this is a life sciences example. I think we see a lot of parallels between life sciences and this industry. Just to be clear, you're saying, if we're a $1 billion revenue company, you're talking top line $25, $50 million just from from kind of enabling distribution, I guess.
Yeah, that's correct. Well, life sciences, that's exactly what we start to see in the top line revenue. The key indicator as well that we track is customer engagement and consistency of that engagement and depth of that engagement. And there's usually a very high correlation between customers engaging consistently and in a deep fashion across the various channels and the revenue gain itself. So we see that strong correlation and can start to use and optimize and point the AI algorithm, if you will, at engagement and improvements in engagement. And we're knowing that that will drive revenue growth.
Mm-hmm. And I imagine these numbers depend on where you're starting from. So if you're maybe at a very immature state, perhaps this distance could be wider in terms of how much improvement, could be had.
You're right. I mean, this is what we're showing here is kind of the average effect, right? So there are companies who have started with less capabilities and need to build some things up, in which case their first couple of steps won't have quite the impact. And there are other companies who've got a lot more going on. And so when they start really pulling it together, they can get even a little bit better. But this is typically what we said, the average middle of the road effect.
That's great. So let's say you guys have sold me on this idea and I'm ready to do it. Okay. I'm an easy target, admittedly, but so, if I'm a firm looking to start out on this journey, I said, yep, you know what, I really do need to kind of pursue this AI-enabled distribution, really elevate my game in this area. How would you begin? Pete, I'll stick with you.
Yeah, so I think I would piggyback off what Arun said, right? So the key aspect to getting this right is to not sit around and say, well, hey, I want to do a next best action or a decision engine, or hey, let's build a data lake, or let's hire some data scientists or anything like that. The reality is it's got to be, wait a second, I want to be more customer focused, and then think holistically about what that means, right? And not just, I want to be more customer focused, so I'm going to build a data lake, right? I'm going to be more customer focused, so I need a couple of capabilities to happen and to build that and lay out a roadmap as to how that happens, given some of the investments that the organization may have already made. But it's anchoring, exactly what everyone said, anchoring to what we want to do with the customer in the marketplace is critical to that. Otherwise, everybody in the hallway starts thinking they have different ideas about what we're actually doing. No, it's an IT project. No, it's an analytic project. No, I'm doing a market research study. So the focus of that customer, what that customer experience is, what we're trying to accomplish with that customer, and working backwards and sticking to that is critical.
That makes a lot of sense. And I know maybe we've done some work on kind of what these journeys look like. I know not every firm is all the way down. Maybe Pete, you can speak to that as well.
Yeah, so you start to look at kind of a maturity map of what we have here on the screen. So on the left-hand side, we typically call it as tactic marketing, which is nothing's coordinated, nothing's integrated. We're not using anything to inform anything, and we're just throwing things out in the marketplace. That's the left-hand side. And then we start to say, okay, so then what happens next? The next phase is to start doing a little bit of trigger marketing. What we mean by that is connecting some of these channels, right? So if I engage in one channel, maybe I'll get a triggered communication from another channel, or even that same channel, but just on a different date. So a little bit of trigger marketing. That then moves to what Aaron was talking about, which is really customer journey marketing. How do I proactively plan the customer experience across everything that I have in the marketplace that I can deliver? How do I do that, and what does that look like? So the question we ask in stage 3 is, if I'm your best customer, what happens to me over the next 6 months? What are you trying to accomplish? What message are you trying to get me? What behavior change are you trying to get me to do? And thinking about it that way then says, okay, if that change is what we want, how do I use the content and channels we have access to drive that change? And then the 4th stage is what Arun's been talking about this whole call, which is, can I automate this process through a decision engine? And then can I really use that engine to drive disruption and innovation, et cetera? And that 4th stage really kind of unlocks the full potential, because it allows us, since we're automating, it allows us to get to individual customers and react to individual customers specifically. It's not about thinking, well, I'll pull a target list, or, hey, everybody in the marketplace is the same. It's literally understanding the differences and being able to take action on those differences. That's what that 4th step is about. So this is the maturity map. You can start to see the percentages across the top, number of companies scattered across this. But, there's a lot of movement from left to right as people try to figure this out.
Yeah, and I think, I know we have our own version of a decision engine, the orchestration engine, and I know a lot of the financial firms that focus on the consumer side are already there, at least from what I understand. I think most of the people on the phone today are going to be somewhere in the middle of this picture. I think most of the firms that I'm familiar with are beyond stage 1. They're probably more in the stage 2 zone. I think a lot of companies have maybe hired some data scientists. Maybe they've built some in-house tech to start to do some of these things. And I'm just wondering, if you're kind of partway down this path, Is that bad, or what do I do in that kind of situation? Maybe Arun, I'll throw it to your way. Do I have to throw out all this stuff I've already built? Like what?
No, I think our experience tells us that this is a journey. It's not a destination. So there's no, you're there, now you're done. So find out where you are in that journey. So reflect back, it could be that you use this maturity map that Pete has laid out, figure out where you are, and reflect back and see what have you done that's worked really well for you, where have you struggled, and I think that's an important first step. Second is figure out what is the problems that you next need to solve, I think, and find ways to socialize it. And make sure that it's important for the organization at large, and senior leadership have buy-in on why this is an important thing for the organization. And then perhaps most importantly, I think that don't make this purely an analytics initiative. And I think that this has to be something that has to span multiple functions. Analytics is a capability that supports the problem that you're solving, supports this journey, but it's not the end goal of it. So how do I make this a sales, marketing, product, BT, large cross-functional initiative, and where analytics is playing an important role? So think about that. And for those of you, maybe you're in that 25% where you are on Pete's map here, I think don't worry. From my experience working across multiple industries, those that are ahead of you are not that far ahead. I think my personal opinion is that you can certainly catch up. That's number one. And number two, I think leapfrogging is becoming easier and easier in today's environment than it ever was before. And what do I mean by leapfrogging? You don't have to lay copper cables in the ground if you can go straight to 3G, as many countries in Africa did. So you can think of putting things up in the cloud and moving to an environment that enables you to do some of these analytics. You don't have to do the MDM and all the other tools and that sort of a process. There are ways to jump ahead. So think of that for those that are perhaps finding themselves to be lagging.
That's helpful. And I like what you said, Arun, that don't think of this as an analytics project or program, but kind of think of it as a customer program. And if that's the case, I feel like that chief distribution officer, if there is such a person, would be the person to champion this, or the head of marketing or head of sales. And if that's the case, then Aaron, I'm wondering if you're a leader of one of those teams, how should you be thinking about these stages and this maturity?
Yeah, I think one other important point about this is it's accelerating the learning across the organization. So I really think the organizations that learn the fastest will win. And how do we learn as a cross-functional team? How do we actually use data to prioritize so that as a marketing manager, we're focused on delivering those meaningful messages that land with customers in the right channel at the right time, right? So we have more insight, we have a greater success rate. Those closed loops and metrics really matter there. How do we deliver the right product fit so that the way we talk about our products really resonates with our customers? How do we take into account the broader context of the company, of the environment, geopolitical things? A lot of things are happening in China right now in the finance industry. How do we take those into consideration? And how do we actually, going back to the beginning, when we were talking about that vision, where we are today, where we're trying to go, how do we keep that vision in front of people and also give them the autonomy and to make those decisions in service of that direction we're going? And so all of those pieces together.
All right. Well, I appreciate those thoughts. I think I'm going to check. I don't think we have too many other questions. What I will, I'll just scan that, but in doing so, I'll also tee you guys up. We've got about 10 minutes left, so I'll let each of you think about maybe your parting thoughts that you'll give us in 1 minute. I do have just going to scan through the questions real quick here. I think one of the questions that came up was, if you are a smaller company, is this relevant to you? That's my paraphrasing of the question, because, it sounds like it's a big tech investment that could be, capitalized if you were a large firm, but what if you're on the kind of smaller end of the market? I don't know if any of you want to kind of give some thoughts to that.
I can tell you one thing we're doing with smaller organizations, or even people that are switching for, advancing from stage 2 to stage 3, are some of that advanced prototyping. Like Pete was saying, it is a little bit more manual. We really want to test and learn quickly before we start to use that learning to inform the technology. And so a lot of it is how do we begin working together differently, and how do we start to experiment on what will work, run those kinds of pilots, and then start to scale up using technology.
Okay. Yeah, and I do know, just to add to that, that there are products out here. I mean, again, ZS has a product too, where if you're willing to give up some customization, this doesn't have to be an incredibly onerous investment, but you do have to be willing to give up some customization. So that may be something to think about. So I guess I'll turn it around to you guys real quick for just concluding thoughts. Maybe I'll let you each take no more than a minute. And Arun, why don't I start with you, if that's okay?
Sure. I think maybe in conclusion, I'd like to introduce this concept of an analytics agenda. And so to describe the analytics agenda, it's essentially, let's say your organization has certain strategic priorities or business objectives for the next year, 18 months, 24 months. You have a new product launch, you are entering a new market, you are, whatever the case might be, there are certain key priorities, key business objectives that need to be met. For those key business objectives to be met, certain strategies and tactics need to be deployed. You might launch a new sales organization, you might partner with somebody, whatever the case might be. In order for you to execute on those strategies and tactics, you probably need some insights on how best to execute those strategies and tactics. Those insights are then informed by analysis. That analysis is fed by data. So in other words, start with the broader organizational objective, not just what exists within your individual department, your broader organizational objective, and tie that broader organizational objective with strategy and insights that need to be informed by insights, and then those insights by analysis, and that analysis conducted through data. If you have this stronger tie-in between the analytics journey and the organizational objective, I think chances are you get executive leadership, commitment, and the right resources in a cross-functional team. All of these things come together. And you get clarity. And analytics also gets a seat at the table and to be able to dictate what happens first, second, third, and so on. So I think I want to leave with that concept of this analytics agenda.
Yeah, and build that agenda from the company's perspective, the company's priorities. Yeah. Aaron, what about you? Any parting thoughts here?
Yeah, I think a couple of them. One is the importance of clarity of the direction the company needs to go, because that's the pull that's going. Changing these roles is uncomfortable, and so there's a tension there to draw people to the dream, kind of Martin Luther King style. I have a dream. What's pulling us together in that direction? The right metrics in place. Are we getting closer to that dream or not? So how do we rapidly learn and have those feedback loops? Like Pete was saying, what the right engagement looks like. And I think fundamental to some of this is that journey mapping, not only the processes, but the emotional journeys and how we want to use sales and marketing and other techniques to create meaning for customers, and how that's delivered and how technology can support that.
That's great. Pete, I'll let you have the last say here.
Yeah, so the one last thought I'd leave with everybody is that as you're working down this process, as you're building your roadmap, as you're executing your roadmap, each step on your roadmap should be having an impact in the marketplace. So said another way, if you're spending 6 months internal to your organization, and all you're doing is building a data lake or standing up an engine or doing something that has no direct impact in the marketplace, a red flag should be going up. every capability that's getting built, there should be a path to putting it in market pretty directly. And so each step, as there's an investment in capability building, there should be a corresponding impact in the marketplace. And what that will do is that will keep the organization focused on the long-term nature of what we're trying to accomplish here, versus people thinking, it's just an IT project. That's what that is. And I don't know what's really happening. So make sure that each step of your roadmap has a path to delivering marketplace value. And if you do that, the chances are you'll be on a successful path.
Oh, I really like that across, across the three of you, kind of that keep the agenda driven by the company's priorities, keep that focus on the customer, and then get stuff to market fast, and don't make this a 5-year journey before something actually pays off. That's great. Well, I think with that, we will conclude the session here. So thank you very much to Aaron, Arun, and Pete for giving us your time today. For those of you on the phone, first, there will be a recording of this session up on the ZS website, so you should be able to share it to others in your organizations if you would like. One thing we tried very hard to avoid doing today was to demonstrate our own tools and capabilities in this specific topic. So we wanted it to be more about the human side, but of course, we do have those tools and capabilities. And if you would like to take a deeper dive to see how we might actually navigate through some of the steps that Pete, Aaron, and Arun laid out, just drop a note to Rubesh Jacobs, whose email address is just listed here. We'd be happy to set up kind of a private demonstration for you guys. So with that, I would just say thank you all very much for joining us here today. If we didn't get your questions addressed or answered, please just, again, send them on to Rubesh, and we'll do our best to follow up afterwards. Otherwise, really appreciate your spending the time with us today. Goodbye, everyone.